Starting over. My way. The moment I saw the Facebook post, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. Moving to Thailand with my new girl. Starting fresh. Those words sat on my screen, burning into my mind. My hands trembled as I gripped my coffee mug, but I barely noticed that the coffee had gone cold. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was sitting at my desk, ready to start my usual work routine. But now, nothing about this morning was normal. As I stared at the post, comments started flooding in, shocked reactions, endless questions, and messages of sympathy from mutual friends. Some people reacted with surprise, others with concern, but no one was more surprised than me, not by what he did, but by how carelessly he announced it to the world. With steady fingers, I typed a single-word response. Okay. My name is Elena Mitchell, I'm 52 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life as a software engineer in Chicago. I've been married to Derek Mitchell for 23 years, or at least, I thought I was, until this moment, because, apparently, my husband had just ended our marriage with a Facebook post. Some women might have cried, some might have screamed, others might have rushed to call their friends and family, desperate for support. But I did none of those things. Because I already knew. Derek thought he was the one in control, that he had the upper hand. He assumed I was too blind to see what was happening, too naive to suspect anything, but what he didn't know was that I had been watching, waiting, and preparing for months. It started last spring. The changes in Derek's behavior were small at first, subtle enough that someone else might have missed them. He started working late more often, claiming he had important meetings and deadlines. His phone, which he used to leave lying around the house, was now always in his pocket or face down on the counter. He suddenly had business trips on weekends, even though he'd never needed to travel before. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to trust him. But then he started asking questions about our finances. Derek had always left money matters to me. As a senior manager at a construction company, he made a good salary, but he never cared much about where the money went. He just assumed I handled everything. So when he suddenly became interested in our retirement accounts, investments, and assets, I felt a quiet alarm go off in my head. One night, I mentioned my suspicions to my sister, Kate. "You're being paranoid," she said with a laugh. "Derek wouldn't throw away 23 years of marriage. He's probably just trying to be more responsible with money." I nodded, but I didn't believe it. See, my job as a software engineer has taught me a lot about spotting patterns. Debugging code is all about finding errors, little mistakes that, when pieced together, reveal a much bigger problem, and I was starting to see a very big problem in my marriage. So I did what I do best. I started gathering data. I took note of every late night, every suspicious expense on our credit card, every vague excuse he gave. I made copies of important documents, bank statements, tax records, insurance policies. I even created a special folder on my work computer labeled System Backup 2023, a name that sounded innocent enough if Derek ever saw it. But inside that folder was a detailed record of his behavior, neatly organized like a case file. By the time I had enough proof, I had already consulted with Diana, one of the best divorce attorneys in Chicago. We had a plan in place. I had secured control over our joint accounts, safeguarded my assets, and prepared for the inevitable. Derek may have thought he was making a bold, dramatic escape by posting his announcement online. He thought I'd be devastated, caught off guard, and left scrambling to pick up the pieces of my life. But he was wrong. For years, Derek had joked that I was just a computer nerd who didn't understand how the real world worked. He assumed I was too logical, too focused on work, too dependent on him. He believed that if he ever left, I'd be lost without him. But if there's one thing I've learned from decades of programming, it's this: the best systems are built with fail-safes. They anticipate failure and prepare for every possible outcome. And I had planned for this one perfectly. The perfect payback. I had already informed Derek of the situation. He knew what was coming. I had sent copies of the court order, making everything official. He had nowhere left to run. One evening, as my sister Kate and I sat on my back porch, sipping wine and watching the city lights flicker in the distance, she gave me a knowing look. "You've got him cornered," she said, swirling her glass, "but aren't you worried he might try something drastic?" I took a slow sip before shaking my head. That's why I saved the Facebook post. Every comment, every reaction, every message. If he tries anything, it'll only prove my case to the judge. He doesn't have a move left that won't backfire. And I was right. The moment Derek's lawyer withdrew from the case, I knew the walls were closing in on him. At first, I didn't know why his lawyer had suddenly given up, but later, Diana filled me in. She had sent over the full file of evidence I had gathered, every suspicious bank transaction, every shady business expense, every deleted message between Derek and his mistress, Jessica, that I had managed to recover from our shared cloud storage. It was a complete, undeniable record of his lies. The moment his lawyer saw it, he knew Derek was a lost cause. He wanted no part of the sinking ship. And that's when the desperate calls started. At first, they were angry. "You've ruined my life," Derek screamed in one voicemail. "You're gonna regret this, Elena, I swear." Then they turned pathetic. "Baby, please, I made a terrible mistake. We can fix this. You and me, we were always good together. Don't throw it all away." I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I forwarded every threatening voicemail and desperate plea to Diana. Every call, every text, every voice message went straight into our growing evidence folder. With every angry word he left, he only made my case stronger. But the real final blow wasn't mine to deliver. It came from his own company. They had launched an internal investigation after Diana sent them a formal inquiry regarding Derek's financial activities, and when they dug into his records, they found everything: the misused company funds, the unauthorized expenses, the money he had been skimming from project budgets. Not only was he fired immediately, but they also pressed criminal charges for embezzlement. The day Diana received the official notice, I was in her office. She opened her laptop, scanned the email, and smirked. "Still think you want to move to Thailand?" she asked dryly, because now would probably be a good time. I couldn't help but laugh. For years, Derek had treated me like I was naive, like I didn't understand business, like I was just some clueless computer nerd who couldn't possibly see through his schemes. And yet, here we were. He had undone himself, not because I tricked him, not because I framed him, but because he had always underestimated me. And that was his greatest mistake. 3 weeks after Derek's smug Facebook post, I returned to our house to gather the last of my things. It was my house now, legally, but I had taken my time moving back in. I wanted to scrub every last trace of him from my life before I truly called it home again. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw him. Derek sat on the front steps, unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes, his shoulders slumped in defeat. This was not the man I had been married to for 23 years. This was not the polished, confident executive who had once taken pride in his sharp suits and expensive watches. This was a man who had lost everything. "Elena," he called as I walked past him toward the door. "Please, can we just talk?" I didn't stop. I unlocked the door, ready to step inside. "I've lost everything," he continued, his voice raw. "My job, my reputation, my future. And whose fault is that?" I wanted to say. Instead, I turned to face him. "You didn't just try to leave me, Derek, you tried to destroy me. You thought I would just sit there and watch while you drained our accounts and ran off with Jessica. I never meant." "Yes, you did," I cut him off. "You meant every bit of it. The only thing you didn't mean to do was fail." I pulled out my phone and held up the screen so he could see it. His Facebook post, the one announcing his fresh start, was still there for the world to see. "You were so proud of yourself," I said, so sure I wouldn't see it coming, so sure I was too weak, too dumb, too soft to fight back. He ran a hand through his greasy, unkempt hair. "The company's pressing charges," he muttered. "They say I could face jail time. And Jessica, she won't even answer my calls anymore." I let out a dry chuckle. Imagine that. A woman who helped a married man steal from his wife and his company turned out to be untrustworthy. Who could have seen that coming? Derek let out a shaky breath. "I've got nothing. They froze my accounts. My credit cards are maxed out, and no one will hire me. I can't even afford a decent lawyer." I tilted my head. "And yet, you always said my job was meaningless, that my work didn't matter, that I didn't understand business." He swallowed hard. He knew I was right. "You know what your biggest mistake was?" I asked. "It wasn't the affair. It wasn't the stealing. It wasn't even that ridiculous Facebook post." He looked up at me, his eyes dull, defeated. "Your biggest mistake was underestimating me," I said. "You spent 23 years thinking I was some naive little programmer who couldn't possibly see through your schemes." "Elena," he whispered, "please, we can start over. I'll make it up to you. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in months, I felt absolutely nothing. No, Derek, I said, we can't. I turned the phone around, showing him his own words one last time. But you were right about one thing, I said, smirking. Someone is getting a fresh start, it's just not you. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, leaving him on the steps, finally realizing just how completely his plan had backfired. Starting over, my way. Life moved on. I settled back into my house, now fully mine, and started rebuilding my life the way I wanted it. Kate stayed with me for a while, helping me redecorate, repainting the walls, erasing every trace of the life I had shared with Derek. The divorce was finalized quickly. Derek, now drowning in legal trouble, didn't have the strength to fight me on anything. His new lawyer, far less experienced than the last, advised him to settle. I got the house, I kept my retirement accounts, most importantly, I got my freedom. Word spread through our social circle. Friends who had once commented on Derek's post now reached out to me privately, offering support, sharing their own stories of betrayal and recovery. Sarah, a colleague from work, invited me to a women's support group. At first, I wasn't sure if I belonged, but as I listened to their stories, I realized something. I had done what so many women never got the chance to do. I had turned the tables. I had taken back my power. You should teach a class, Sarah suggested. There are so many women out there who don't know how to protect themselves financially. The idea took root. I started leading workshops on financial security, digital forensics, and protecting personal assets. My first session had only a handful of women, but by the end, they were taking furious notes, their eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before, hope. Diana began referring her clients to me. You're teaching them things even their lawyers don't know, she told me. You're giving them their power back. And I was. For the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free.